Arizona Science is supported by Research Corporation for Science Advancement.
For AZPM, I'm Tim Swindle, Professor Emeritus of Planetary Science at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Joining me today is Charlotte Pearson, an Associate Professor in the university's Laboratory for Tree Ring Research and one of the speakers in this year's College of Science Lecture Series. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hi, Tim.
Charlotte, I've seen you described as a geoarchaeologist and a dendrochronologist. Could you explain what those two things mean?
I'm someone who studies the past, and I'm very interested in what people did in the past and how they interacted with the natural environment, and what influence climate had on them. And primarily I use tree rings to do this, because tree rings give us this amazing record through time of how climate has changed, and they also give us a way to date things that are made of wood, and people have been using wood for a very long time. So I combine those two things together to understand what happened to past populations.
The title of the lecture series is about twists in science. What are some of the twists that you've run into in the tree ring research?
Well, I think one of the beautiful things about being in science, and one of the things that makes me love getting to do science, it's because of the twists, it's because of the unexpected, and it's because there's kind of hope even in failure. And a lot of science, you'll have a hypothesis, you'll test it, and then you'll find, oh, actually you were completely wrong, and there's a completely different answer. Maybe the answer is somewhat ambiguous. Just occasionally, maybe once or twice in a career, you might get it right. And sometimes we don't realize the twist within our lifetime, but because you're part of a scientific continuum where we're all kind of feeding into human knowledge and building this big picture, this massive jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes the piece that fills in your piece doesn't come for 100 years or 50 years. And the story that I'm going to tell in the lecture series is about how tree ring science was developed here at the University of Arizona. It was developed by an astronomer. So his outlook was he wanted to understand the sun, and he had this theory that trees might be able to tell him more about the sun.
Most of us know that trees usually add a ring or a growth layer each year, but how do you tie that to exact dates for something that's no longer in a living tree?
Well, it's really cool and really quite simple to understand. I mean, my family has just celebrated the winter holidays by bringing a tree into the house, a bit of a weird tradition. But when we looked at the bottom of that tree, when we put it into its stand, we saw that it had tree rings. And those tree rings, if you've looked at the base of a tree, you'll notice that some of them are wide and some of them are narrow. And how wide and how narrow they are reflects how good or bad it was for the tree to grow in a particular year. And it turns out that these patterns strongly reflect climate variables through time affecting the tree growth. And it's kind of like a barcode. You get this zigzag pattern if you measure those tree rings, those wide and narrow patterns. And if you take another tree from the same forest and you measure the pattern in that tree, you get another zigzag pattern. And if they're controlled by the same variables of their environment, those patterns will match beautifully. And where they do, that allows you to extend your record of tree rings backwards through time. And the remarkable thing is that there are trees in this country, for example in California, that live for thousands and thousands of years. And so we're able to overlap those patterns not just 50 years or 100 years, but maybe 10,000 years in time. And every single tree ring is a time capsule of the year in which it formed.
What can you tell from the tree ring besides the width of it?
All sorts. And that's the great thing, the gift that keeps on giving, because all the time we're developing new technologies. And the trees just, they just stand there and they passively record what happens to them. They don't have a political agenda, they don't have a bias, they just take a sample. And then from that sample, from that series of sample and data tree rings, we can reconstruct the past. And depending on what you unpack from a single tree ring, you can sort of reconstruct different aspects of the past. So it might be how much rainfall there was. It might be temperature. It might be the year of a really traumatic event for the tree, like a forest fire or an insect outbreak or a volcanic eruption. All of these things will leave a permanent mark in the tree ring record.
Well, thanks for coming in, Charlotte.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today has been Charlotte Pearson, an expert on using tree rings to pin down the dates of things like solar eruptions. And the next speaker in the University of Arizona College of Science Lecture Series at 7 p.m. next Wednesday at Centennial Hall on the University of Arizona campus. This is Tim Swindle, and you have been listening to Arizona Science. You can also listen to this and other Arizona Science segments by going to the AZPM website at azpm.org.
Thank you to Research Corporation for Science Advancement for their support of Arizona Science.